This is an I Am Listening original podcast.
The number one issue in this area is cost of living. People care about immigration, and I take that very seriously, but they're more concerned with not being able to put food on their plates, not being able to get their kids' school uniforms or put petrol in the cars, or rent going up, mortgages going up. Yeah. You know, it's becoming a real problem for so many people in this constituency.
Welcome to the Kent Politics Podcast, your go-to source for insightful discussions on local and national political matters. Join us as we take a deep dive into local government across the county. Find out what the key decision makers have to say, what your money is being spent on, and how the party's policies could affect how we live. Plus, don't miss our regular feature, Westminster Watch, where we dissect the latest developments and decisions shaping the political landscape in the heart of the UK's capital. Engage with us as we delve into the issues that matter to you and explore the dynamic world of politics from a Kent perspective.
Welcome to the Kent Politics Podcast, in a week where cuts to a vital service sparked rumours of a split inside Medway Labour, the ongoing saga of a town's ailing bridge took another twist, and plans to place asylum seekers in a care home caused outrage. I'm Dan Essen, the local democracy reporter covering borough and district councils in Kent. I'm joined by Robert Boddy, who covers Medway Council.
Hello.
And news editor Sean Delaney, who's standing in for KCC reporter Simon Finlay, who's away this week.
Hello.
We'll also be speaking to senior editor Matt Ramsden, who's standing in for political editor Paul Francis about the week in Westminster. And our special guest is Mike Tapp, Labour's candidate for Dover and Deal at the next general election. First up is Robert. So what's been going on in Medway?
Well, last week, the Citizens Advice Medway at Kingsley House in Gillingham shut until further notice after Medway Council withdrew funding in the budget a couple of weeks ago. Citizens Advice, for those who don't know, is a national charity which has bureaus across the country which offer advice on things like legal matters, debt, consumer issues, housing and other problems.
So why did Medway Council withdraw the funding?
So the decision to withdraw funding was made under the previous Tory administration in January last year, though the current Labour administration say they support that decision because they decided to bring the services which were contracted to Citizens Advice Medway around welfare and debt advice in-house for the council to provide themselves.
But there's something of a twist in this, isn't there?
Yes, so the statement put out originally said the organisation was having to undergo a restructure and was closed until further notice, and laid the blame pretty squarely at Medway Council's feet and the withdrawal of funding. However, this version has since been deleted from their website, and another statement from Chief Executive Dan MacDonald was released saying the closure of the office is only temporary, or ongoing cases will continue to be managed, the outreaches are continuing, and added that the withdrawal of funding was mainly down to cuts from central government funding. The interesting thing is that the Chief Executive of Citizens Advice Medway, Dan MacDonald, is also a Labour councillor for Gillingham South. Some Tory councillors have said that this has created another rift within the Labour group, and it was even suggested that the group had leaned on Councillor MacDonald to put out a statement that was more beneficial to the council, though of course that's only speculation.
Interesting. Thank you very much, Robert. So, Sean, you've been tracking goings-on at County Hall in Simon's absence. What's caught your eye?
Well, KCC has certainly put the cat among the pigeons with a decision to place unaccompanied child asylum seekers in a disused care home on the Isle of Sheppey. This has led to protests and the establishment of a petition, which at the time of recording has almost 4,000 signatures.
So whereabouts on the island is this care home, and who are they going to be placing there?
So KCC has written to people in Minster-on-Sea saying from as early as next month it will be moving 50 16 and 17-year-olds into Ocean Heights, which is close to the Leys, right on the seafront. Ocean Heights is a new build care home next to an existing home which cares for elderly and vulnerable residents. So
obviously it's caused a bit of a backlash. Who's involved in campaigning against it?
Well, there are different strands of anger regarding the plans. Firstly, is the fact that it's happening at all. As we all know, the subject of asylum seekers and the small boats is completely toxic, and the thought of people, even though they're children, being placed there has caused lots of upset. Secondly, in recent months, the island's only KCC-run care home, Blackburn Lodge in CNS, was closed down. This meant vulnerable people had to be moved miles away from their families. And finally, MP Gordon Henderson has spoken of his outrage. He says he's asked the Home Office whether rumours about the plan were true and was told they weren't.
Right, so you'd usually assume that immigration asylum stuff is a Home Office problem. What's the County Council's role in all of this?
Well, to be fair to them, KCC is in a bit of a tight spot here because Kent is on the front line of the small boats crisis. The council has a legal responsibility to house unaccompanied children, something the High Court ruled on last year. They need to find places to house these youngsters, but you can guarantee it will be controversial wherever they find. There's no easy solution, and the Sheppey situation has the potential to become explosive as tensions are running high.
Yeah, one to watch, as there's loads of other sites across the county that are apparently also earmarked to possibly hold unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. Thanks very much for explaining that, Sean.
Thanks.
Dan, what's been happening at borough and district level?
So it's not really directly either borough or district level, but I've been looking back into a long-running dispute between Faversham Town Council, Kent County Council and Peel Ports, one of the largest property companies in the country. For some years now, there's been a campaign to get the swing bridge over Faversham Creek restored to working order. And a few weeks ago, the local MP, Helen Whately, convened a meeting which she said made progress, but some other people were saying it's just kicking the can down the road.
So why does the bridge matter, and what's the most recent news about it?
So the swing bridge over Faversham Creek has been unusable for quite a long time. I haven't been able to find out exactly how long, but a good number of years. That bridge is meant to open and close and allow control of the water level and allow boats in and out of the creek. But now the basin, where boats usually dock, is basically just full of mud and silt owing to years of disuse. And local campaigners for years have been saying that they want a new working swing bridge because it brings some life back to that area of the town with some maritime traffic and that sort of thing. They say that the company Peel Ports is ultimately responsible and they should cough up the cash to get a new bridge. The cost of that was last estimated at about 2.5 to 3 million. That was all the way back in 2019. So a couple of weeks ago, the local MP, Helen Whately, who's been sort of involved in this on the peripheries for a while, met with staff from the Department for Transport, the County Council and local campaigners, where the DFT said that everyone involved in Kent, the County Council and the Town Council, need to organise basically a legal arbitration process and get Peel Ports to agree to participate so they can establish once and for all who actually owns the bridge and who's responsible for fixing it. Peel Ports have submitted evidence to the Department for Transport saying that they don't think they're responsible for it, but they didn't actually come to the meeting, so a lot of the campaigners are kind of concerned that Peel Ports aren't really interested in resolving it.
I mean, surely it's not hard for the government to know who actually owns the waterway and its infrastructure, so why is there this confusion?
You'd think it'd be quite easy, but no, the seeds of this were sown way back in the early 90s. Up until about 1991, Chatham Docks and the Port of Sheerness and a load of the other waterways connecting to the River Medway in North Kent were managed by the Medway Ports Authority, but many ports, including Medway Port, were privatised under the 1991 Ports Act. In 92, it was sold to a consortium of companies and employees, but that privatisation ended up very controversial when it was later sold on for almost 8 times what the government got for it only 18 months earlier. About 10 years later, in 2005, Peel Ports bought out the firm which had bought out Medway Ports, and with that they took on all of the waterways and all the responsibilities, or at least it was thought at the time. Peel Ports, the name of their company is even written on the signs of the control building for the swing bridge, but they claim that because it's a public highway, they don't own it, fixing it isn't their problem, and they shouldn't be stumping up the money. For the year or so that I've been looking into this on and off, they've always maintained that they want to see, a viable business reason to reopen the bridge, and have argued that they're not the ones responsible. So to many campaigners locally, including the Town Council, it seems pretty clear-cut that Peel Ports are the one responsible and they should be helping pay for a replacement. But it's kind of par for the course when you have private companies, several different layers of government involved in owning, running and maintaining infrastructure. Lines of responsibility get quite blurry very easily. Well, that wraps up what's been happening across Kent and Medway. Thank you very much, Robert and Sean, for your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So next up, we're speaking to senior editor Matt Ramsden about events in Westminster. What's the latest over there, Matt?
Hi, Dan. It's the Easter recess at the moment, so there's not a lot going on other than polls being released, which heap more pressure on the government and Prime Minister Rishi Sunak.
I feel like I've heard that one before. Things don't seem to be getting much better for the government, do they?
No, not at all. It's constant bad news for the government and the Conservative Party. In fact, one poll of 15,000 voters by the polling company Survation would have made for alarming reading in Downing Street. If the results of that survey turned into reality, you could see the Tories left with fewer than 100 seats and cabinet members being defeated en masse. In Kent, it would mean the following: Labour picking up 12 of the county's 18 seats. Among the Tory casualties would be Sir Roger Gale, who's been Herne Bay MP for 41 years. The Conservatives would hold on to Sevenoaks, Sittingbourne and Sheppey, Tunbridge Wells, Weald of Kent and Faversham and Mid-Kent, but Labour would win former Tory strongholds such as Folkestone and Hythe, which even stayed blue when Tony Blair stormed to victory in 1997. The Survation poll predicts nationally that Labour could be on course for a landslide, winning 468 seats in total. Even Rishi Sunak and Chancellor Jeremy Hunt could be looking at losing their seats, as could well-established Kent MP Gareth Johnson, who has represented Dartford since 2010.
So you've singled out Dartford there, but what makes that constituency particularly interesting?
Yeah, well, it's Britain's longest bellwether seat, which means it holds the record for voting for the party that goes on to win the overall election. Whichever way Dartford goes, or Britain goes, this has been the case for 16 elections in a row now, all the way back to October 1964. Now, according to the experts at the Electoral Calculus website, Gareth Johnson only has a 23% chance of retaining his seat. So it's definitely a key constituency to watch in the coming months.
But obviously, polls have a pretty mixed track record. Surely there's reason to distrust that this might actually happen.
Yeah, you're right. They do have a reputation at times for getting the public mood wrong. But just looking at these numbers, they're so bad for the Conservatives in many ways. They've got an absolute mountain to climb just to be competitive when the general election finally comes. If the local elections in May are as bad as feared for the Tories, there'll no doubt be calls for yet another leadership election, something I doubt the public will be impressed by.
Yeah, but it would definitely make our jobs more exciting for a bit at least. Thank you very much, Matt, for your insight into what's happening.
Thank you.
Is there a topic that you would like to be discussed on the Kent Politics podcast? Perhaps you've got a question for one of our panel, or you'd like to comment on a hot topic in local or national government. Get in touch by emailing or sending a voice note to kentpoliticspodcast@thekmgroup.co.uk.
Now we hear from political editor Paul Francis, who interviewed Labour's parliamentary candidate for Dover and Deal, Mike Tapp, on what he would do for the constituency if he was elected.
Thanks for taking part in the podcast.
You're welcome.
Just wanted to ask about how you got into politics. What was the draw for you? Because you served in, the army and high up in the police intelligence. Mm-hmm. Why did you suddenly switch to politics?
It's something that I've been involved in my mind for decades. I've always taken a keen interest in politics, and that comes down to loving the country and being very, very patriotic. As you can see, there's a flag right behind you. And my service was and is something that I enjoyed a lot with the military. I went on 3 operational tours of duty, 1 to Iraq, 2 to Afghanistan. And then coming towards the end of my service with the military, I knew that that's what I wanted to continue doing. And at that point, I did think about politics, but I was very young. And there's nothing wrong with people that age going into politics. But my personal view at that stage was, I want to get a bit more life experience and serve a little longer. So then I went to National Crime Agency and Ministry of Defence, working in combating serious and organised crime and in a counter-terrorist role. And it was great. And I was just waiting for the right time as to when I should sort of make that move. And it sort of coincided quite nicely with my wife running a small business and needing some help. So I put in for a sabbatical at the Ministry of Defence, for a 12-month sabbatical, so I could help my wife grow her business, whilst at the same time start dipping my toe into politics with the Labour Party, of course, and see how it goes, because it's not easy. So it's nice to have that 12-month buffer. Yeah. When it got to the sort of 6-7 month point, I did feel quite confident that I could possibly achieve this. I'm a very positive thinker, and if I get my teeth into something, I pursue it, and as you can see, and I might not always achieve what I want to, but I'll certainly get a long way there through my efforts. And so I felt like that was the right time to take the plunge, and did. But at the very core of it is serving, and I love this country. Dover and Deal has been neglected for so long, since Gwyn Prosser's time, who was the last Labour MP here, and I will continue working hard to achieve a victory if I can.
Are there values that you see in politics, the same kind of values that you see in the military and in the services?
I do, and I want more of it. So integrity is very important to me. The operations that I worked on in the intelligence world meant that if you made a mistake, you told people about it. Because if you didn't, then there could be potentially people's lives at risk. And that was drummed into me and to my colleagues at the time, and that stayed with me. And it is very important, and I think we need more of that in politics. And you see it a lot from the Labour Party. There's great integrity, but not so much from the other side. I'm bound to say that, but I really believe it, given some of the scandals we've seen.
And do you have any family background in politics at all?
Not really. So my dad was a career police officer. So he was your Bobby on the beat that knew everyone. My granddad was a Coleman's salesman, Coleman's mustard. My mum was a social worker. So there's that working class background and service background. And politics was talked about, but there was never any, involvement from my family in that.
Yeah. And, you say you're motivated by service. Most politicians go into the job saying that and perhaps do so as they promised to. But MPs have got a bad reputation, haven't they? What would you do to help restore that kind of reputation?
For me, judging me on my record, and it has been service, and looking at my opponents, judge them on theirs, and it hasn't been. There's been a lot of self-serving, particularly in Dover, with second jobs, suspension from Parliament, etc. What I will do is always have a strategy of delivery and always ensure that there's 1, 2, 3 projects that I'm working on for the community, ticking over when I'm an MP, and I will work my hardest to deliver them. Things like community centres where they're needed, but also ensuring that at a national level, what's delivered by Keir Starmer's government has a positive impact on Dover, and I will be that voice. And that's the service. What I've said to people is, if I win, I don't gain a voice, they do, because that's what I will do. And since selection, I've knocked on tens of thousands of doors, and that's not an exaggeration, listening to people, so that I've got a really good understanding of what needs to be delivered for them. And if I'm elected, that will not end. So there'll be regular surgeries to meet. I will continue knocking on doors so that I'm accessible, and that gives me the opportunity to listen and then deliver where I can.
As you say, people will judge you on your record, and perhaps they're able to already. But I was interested, you had some endorsements from one of your allies, bosses, as it were, in the army. Was it?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, Mr. Tamlin, Major Tamlin.
Yeah. Who was he, and why did he come out, do you think?
So he was my commanding officer in Iraq. It was my first tour of duty, and we've remained in contact since then. And he actually lives up in Hertfordshire, because we were based at Chicksand, so it's not far from there. And I got back in contact with him when they were selecting the candidate there, just to see what his views were in general from the area, because obviously it's Grant Shapps who they're up against.
Yeah.
And he then started talking to me about, wanting to do this for the community and some ideas that he had, etc. And then we just sort of rekindled that relationship, really. And I asked him, would you give me an endorsement? Because I think I can tell you all that I was a hard worker in the military, but everyone's going to say that. So it's great to have your old boss come out and say it, essentially.
Do these things matter, or are they individual endorsements like that, or are they just helpful around the margins?
I think they matter, because it is about record, isn't it? And if the residents here can see that I am a hard worker, that I do have that integrity and discipline, then it's only going to help.
I mean, in some senses, politics is very like serving in the military, isn't it? Because MPs are whipped and asked to vote in certain ways. Uh-huh. Presumably, you would say that's a great advantage with your background to apply the same skill set to politics.
Yeah. With whipping, that's why you've got to be really confident in the party that you are serving with. And I'm really confident that the Labour Party will make the right decisions that deliver for Dover and Deal. I see that real drive from Keir Starmer and the front bench to actually stand up for working people, but also not exclude the middle, for example, who are so important to this country, and they need standing up for too.
These are the people your politicians refer to as hard-working families.
I mean, hard work has to be, we have to ensure that is rewarded. And I think for too long under this Conservative government, it hasn't been. And, you speak to people who are earning good money, who can't afford to pay their bills, who have just had 400, 500, 600. I spoke to someone who had a £750 increase in their mortgage. I spoke to one woman who, and this was actually quite heartbreaking, who was sat in her car in tears when I went to knock on the door. And she had rode the petrol light for too long and couldn't get to work. And she was on I think it was a 0-hour contract, but it wasn't secure work. I can't remember the exact details. And her then worry was that if I don't turn up, I'm going to lose my job. These are people who are hardworking and shouldn't be punished for that and shouldn't be struggling. That in-work poverty is an absolute disgrace in one of the richest nations on the planet, essentially.
Now, you're on a seat which is a Labour target seat. In fact, I think it's along with the New South seat, one of the two most targeted or official targets for the party. It's a walkover, isn't it, for you? Tories are trailing badly in the polls, lots of infighting going on, not setting out a particular programme that they'll follow? You could just sit back and watch the votes come in, couldn't you?
That would be nice. No, unfortunately not. There's no certainty here. No votes have been cast, and we won't know.
You say that. You must have a feeling from what your canvassing is telling you.
I feel good, but I also identify that there are far too many undecided voters, and therefore we must ensure they understand our vision and what we will do for them. There is no victory in any seat so far, and we have to work, and this is what I'm doing, as if we are 5 points behind in the polls every day, which is why I'm knocking on so many doors. It's why my feet already hurt, and it's important.
You say knocking on doors and getting good response. There's still 7 months, maybe 8 months out of an election. People are a bit fed up with seeing politicians going about their campaigns already.
Do you know, I've been doing this for over a year and a half now since election, knocking doors in every bit of spare time. The only person that's fed up with it, but she's been fantastic, is my wife, because we don't get to see each other. But no, on the doors, honestly, some of them are a bit surprised that we're campaigning so early. But then I say to them, well, wouldn't you rather this than it will be rushed in 6 weeks? It shows that I genuinely care, because I'm out for, when it comes to the election, let's say it is May, then that will be 2 years on the doors. And that takes, you have to really care to do that much, I think. And 2 years is the longest job interview I've ever had. But it shows, I think, to the residents here how committed I am. And also it gives me that fantastic understanding of each community and what they need.
What about the presence of some of these populist groups, parties, particularly the Reform Party, who have crept up in the polls, clearly strike a chord with a particular constituency of people? Are you worried they might suck away votes, siphon off votes from Labour and allow the Tories back in? Is that a kind of concern?
So on the rare times that they do come up on the door, as if they say they're going to vote reform, then I will say to them that look what their vision is for the nation and look at the people that run for them. And they often wrap themselves up in flags, but they don't care about the country. Now, I'm a big flag waver, and that's because I love this country and I've served this country, and I will continue to do that. And people respond well to that because they believe me because I've done it. And that won't happen with those sorts of parties.
You just don't believe what the polls are saying, or when it comes down to it, people who've perhaps expressed an interest or in supporting them will change their minds and be won around by your platform?
I think it depends why they're looking to vote reform, if anyone does. And I would suggest that might be along the immigration lines, because that's obviously something they campaign on regularly. And,
Well, you say that, but they're widening their,
And only because they have to, because going in on a single issue tends to not work with politics. But what I would say to anyone looking at who to vote for in terms of securing the borders, I'm the person in Dover and Deal and the Labour Party. We've set out an effective 5-point plan, and it's not headline grabbing, it's not your Rwanda gimmicks, but it will actually work. And that's what people expect, and that's what people need to see now. We've had enough of this ridiculous ideas to try and look like they're doing, things to stop this problem.
Isn't your problem is that people can't see what your policy would be like in practice when it comes to it, and therefore they've only got the kind of Conservative government's
so it's the visual of a flight going to Rwanda. That's why they do it, because it's headline grabbing, but it won't actually do anything. We've taken more refugees from Rwanda than we've sent, and if a flight does take off, we're still looking at only up to 200 potentially going. Labour's plan is for a dedicated National Crime Agency cell. Now, I've worked there, and I know that this is a good policy, and we're looking at a couple of hundred officers at minimum, intelligence officers, investigators, enforcement teams, financial investigators, and they will work upstream with the French and further afield. And it doesn't just have to be focusing on enforcement, which means putting people in prison, as much as we love to see that. These people are hard to catch. They are organised criminals. So we treat them like we treat terrorists. And terrorists are good at evading capture because they know how to toe the line. They know they've got their operational and communication security is pretty decent. But if we treat them like that and bring all the powers to bear that we use, for example, the security services and the police to take out terrorists, with the smuggling gangs and this dedicated unit, it will have a massive impact.
I mean, do you think that joint approach is conceivable, given that we're outside Brexit and outside the European Union, or does it make no difference? Because, I mean, you're describing a kind of, policy approach, which is kind of quite hard, tackling at root rather than symptoms, maybe.
But we do both. So I'll just touch on the second point of the plan, which is if they do arrive by small boats, for example, we speed the processing up. And that needs more decision makers in the Home Office and returns agreements in place. So we deport those that shouldn't be here and help those that need it. But we need to work closer with European partners. Brexit aside, this is about making Brexit work. And to do that, we have to have those relationships across borders, essentially.
We've seen over the last few days tractors organising a go slow at the port. That's adopting a kind of French-style opposition. Are you worried about more actions like that in terms of, if the government doesn't get this technology issue sorted?
I worry about our farmers and that they work so hard and are struggling to make a living off them. I worry about the borders here and, if you just look at what they're doing with the food biosecurity and potentially moving that 22 miles up to Sevington, doesn't make any sense. If you want to check food coming in and meat coming in, you do it where it comes in. There's been no assurances that gap between Dover and Sevington won't allow people to offload meat or indeed not even turn up to Sevington. What I will be doing is reaching out to farmers locally, particularly those that are organising and being involved in these protests, so that I can learn and listen to them and then see what Labour can do better for them.
Well, I think their concern is about contaminating the food chain.
It's a big part of it. And look, Dover Council and myself, we are putting a lot of pressure on DEFRA to change that decision. And a big question I have for DEFRA and the Conservative Party is, are you abandoning your legal duties to keep our food supply chain safe by doing that?
You think there's illegals?
Potentially. Not a lawyer, but they do need to keep our food chain secure and illegal meat out of it by essentially scrapping the border checks and moving them inland. Is that potentially breaking the law? Yeah. And I'd like that question answered. We need reassurances from DEFRA and the Conservatives. I haven't spoken to anybody who tells me this is a good idea.
Yeah, but actually just returning to this issue of the small boats, isn't the danger that you're fighting the constituency on which this issue is most potent, but the rest of the country is potentially disinterested in it or very interested in it and will, perhaps cost you votes? I mean, because of this inability, you've got to show what your changes would bring.
It's important that I do not ignore an issue that is important to residents. And this is what the Labour Party does now. We're not here to preach. We're here to listen and meet them where they are and then tell them what we will do about that issue that concerns them. And that's what I'm doing on immigration and small boats. They've talked to me about it on the doors. And so therefore, I've then spoken with Yvette Cooper and I've sat down with long conversations with her office to ensure that we do have an effective 5-point plan. Stephen Kinnock's a fantastic voice for this as well, by the way. And now I'm telling them what I'll do. But there is no doubt about it that the number one issue in this area is cost of living. People care about immigration, and I take that very seriously, but they're more concerned with not being able to put food on their plates, not be able to get their kids' school uniforms or put petrol in the cars or rent going up, mortgages going up. It's becoming a real problem for so many people in this constituency.
I was looking at some figures for unemployment rates comparatively between now and 10 years ago, and Dover hasn't really moved terribly much in terms of reducing the unemployment count.
And the work opportunities, new work opportunities are few and far between. And this is where Labour's vision for a modern industrial strategy, which essentially creates thousands of jobs while also saving the planet, will be fantastic for areas like this. And East Kent in general, not just talking Dover. There's opportunities there to build British and create thousands of jobs. And I will be banging that drum if I get elected to make sure that those jobs come here.
Are they going to be meaningful jobs though? And, we've seen a lot of attention focused on, like you say, people who fear the cost of living crisis more than anything. The big provider, perhaps, is the port, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Providing employment opportunities. Yet at the same time, there are some issues around the port getting kind of public subsidy, public taxpayers' money for there were various improvements. Where do you sit on that? I mean, because no one would want to see the port disappear.
So starting with P&O and obviously 800 losses, where they've absolutely let down 800 workers, potentially criminally. I know it's a civil case rather than criminal at the moment. And the Conservatives have not done what they said they would do. And effectively, P&O could do that again tomorrow with some more creative...
they have changed the legislation.
Around fire and rehire. So Labour have got this new deal for working people where we will outlaw fire and rehire to make sure that they can't renegotiate contracts to be worse and then fire people if they don't sign them. And obviously also around minimum wages as well.
I mean, that's around the ferry operators.
P&O. Port. Yeah. So I
mean, it's getting levelling up money. But somebody might say, why is levelling up money going to infrastructure and not to people? I mean, are these valid criticisms?
Absolutely. And this all goes back to 2020, where the port realised that, hey, we're going to have these new biometric digital borders coming in 3 or 4 years' time. We better get something done so that there's not more chaos in Dover. Obviously, we already see that at peak holiday times. So they put in a bid, I think it's £33 million, if I remember correctly, to the Cabinet Office, and they rejected it outright. So there was no money to help build that infrastructure to ease the pressure on the road. And then for some reason, the Conservatives woke up and realised, oh, look, we've got digital borders coming in a year, and they've granted £43 million, but from the Levelling Up Fund. Now, I'm really clear on this, that it's good they've got that money because we do need to ensure that we minimise the chaos, but it's from completely the wrong place because that sort of money should go to communities. For example, community centre in Aycliffe, it's been left empty for far too long now. So the money's good that it's going there. It is needed. Now, I'm also hearing reports that they haven't received that money yet and that it won't be complete until 2027. So if they'd done this in 2020, that would be coming to an end now, those works. So that will ease some of the pressure on the roads. But you only have to go up on the cliffs and look down on the port and you can see the geographical challenge. We're stuck between the fantastic, iconic white cliffs and obviously the sea. And we don't have that much space. So there needs to be better solutions than this. What they're doing in the port is good, but I don't think it's enough alone. And that's where the relationship, the French, is so important because of the juxtaposed borders. And this is where it's quite difficult in opposition, essentially, because I don't see what talks are going on with the French and what we could do to ease that pressure digitally and those digital solutions.
Do you share, for example, the views of a Conservative MP in Kent, Helen Whately, who said the M20 shouldn't be used as a car park for holiday traffic? It should be used when there are genuine crises or emergencies.
I mean, the M20 is open for anyone to use it, and it's an important freight route, isn't it? I think 70% of Britain's freight roll on, roll off comes through the port. So it is very important. And I see they're doing some work there at the moment that could help. But the big issue is going to be the digital solution that we have for collecting people's biometrics. And look, Natalie Elphicke doesn't want this issue because...
Well, presumably you don't know.
I don't want this issue. Anyone that cares about the community won't want this issue. And I'm not saying Natalie Elphicke particularly cares about the community, but if she's going to run a general election in November off the back of the new borders, it's going to be utter chaos and it's going to have a massive impact. I think all the stakeholders want to see a solution here, but the fact is this: what we haven't seen from the Conservatives is long-term planning. And it was so obvious this was coming. We all knew it was coming. Dover Port knew it was coming. The only people that didn't was the Conservative government. And that's why they rejected that funding in 2020, and it's causing massive issues. So if they can't see into the future things that are so obvious, how can we trust them with the long-term future of Dover and Deal, and indeed the whole country?
Can I just go back to this issue about the timetable for the implementation? You're saying that you've heard reports that it may not be until 2027.
Sorry, that's the work in the port. Won't be completed until 2027.
This is the expansion of areas for parking.
Exactly. Yeah. If Rishi Sunak wants to launch a general election in October at the same time all the ports come to a standstill, then go for it. I think a big indicator as to when the election is going to be is to whether he tries to delay this again, because we've had 3 or 4 delays around this coming in. If he does that soon, then that's a big indicator of a November election.
I mean, where do you stand on that timing? Do you think it's going to be earlier rather than later, or presumably you're preparing for both possibilities?
I don't think I don't think anyone knows. I don't think Rishi Sunak knows. I think it's really tricky, isn't it? Because obviously the polls are looking bad for the Conservatives. And the consideration, obviously, that he's going to be having is, if I go long, does something change? Does something happen? Events, dear boy, does something come up and change things?
It could be a bad thing or a good thing, couldn't it?
This is it, yeah. And the longer he goes, the weaker he gets. His party's in turmoil. He's about to potentially lose 2 by-elections this week and another 2 this month. Is that going to have more letters going in? Is he going to be on the ropes and have to call it early? We just don't know. And look, from my point of view, I don't really care. I just continue doing what I'm doing, knocking on doors, speaking with residents, meeting community groups. If it's November, it gives me more time to talk to more people and understand even more, so I can be a better member of Parliament if I'm elected.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks to everyone for joining me on this week's podcast. We'll be back next week where we hear from the regular team and another special guest. Don't forget to tune in to KMTV at 5 p.m. each Friday for their politics show. Thanks very much for your time.
Thanks for listening to the Kent Politics Podcast. Don't forget to check out stories throughout the week on the politics page of Kent Online. And you can watch the Kent Politics Show with Rob Bailey on KMTV every Friday at 5 p.m. or on demand at kmtv.co.uk.
This has been an I Am Listening original podcast. For more information, head over to our website, im-listening.co.uk.